Imagine getting a call out of the blue, telling you you've inherited millions, from someone you barely remember. Now imagine uncovering secrets that change everything you thought you knew about your past. This is a story about love, betrayal, and the unbreakable bonds that define us. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss what happens next. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our community of storytelling lovers. After you watch, let us know in the comments, what would you do if you were in Emma's shoes? Your thoughts might just surprise us all. This hook creates intrigue by posing a scenario that sparks curiosity while encouraging engagement through subscription and comments. Hi, my name's Emma Carson. Let me tell you how my life turned upside down one ordinary Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table, sipping coffee that had gone cold hours ago, when the phone rang. It wasn't anyone I expected. It never is when it's something life-changing. On the other line was this lawyer, Mr. Thompson, who sounded like he'd stepped straight out of an old black and white movie, clipped sentences, formal tone, and just enough mystery to make your skin prickle. He said, "Emma Carson, I regret to inform you that Mr. Benjamin Aldridge passed away last week." Now, if you're wondering why that name doesn't ring a bell for me, trust me, I wondered the same thing. But before I could even ask what this had to do with me, he dropped the bombshell. Mr. Aldridge has left his entire estate to you. His entire estate. A mansion in upstate New York, stocks, bonds, cars, you name it. All mine. From some guy I didn't even know. I hung up the phone feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My mind raced back to all the wildest scenarios. Had I won some secret lottery? Was this some kind of prank? And then, slowly, painfully, pieces started coming together. Years ago, right after college, I worked as a nanny for a wealthy family in Manhattan. The Harrisons. They lived in this sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, and they paid me peanuts while treating me like, well, let's just say I wasn't exactly part of the family. But there was someone else there too, a man named Benjamin Aldridge. He wasn't related to them, but he visited often. At first, I thought he was another billionaire buddy of Mr. Harrison's, but no, he was different. Quieter. Kinder. Benjamin would sit in the corner of the living room, reading books or staring out the window, lost in thought. Sometimes, on those long afternoons when the kids were napping, we'd talk. Not about anything important, really, just small things. Books we liked, places we wanted to visit, dreams we had tucked away. Looking back now, I realize he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself back then. Hope, maybe. Potential. Or maybe just a girl trying her best to survive in a world that felt so far out of reach. But here's the thing, I only worked for the Harrisons for about 6 months. After that, I moved on, chasing whatever job would pay the bills. I never saw Benjamin again. Never heard from him. Until now, apparently. The lawyer told me to come to his office the next day to sign papers and get more details. So naturally, I spent the rest of the night pacing my apartment, replaying every memory I had of Benjamin. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? And most importantly, what strings were attached? Because nothing in life comes free, especially not millions of dollars from a stranger. That brings us to today. Tomorrow, I'll walk into that lawyer's office and find out exactly what Benjamin Aldridge left behind, and why he chose me. But honestly, part of me already knows. Somewhere deep down, I think this isn't just about money. This is about second chances. About choices I made, or didn't make, all those years ago. And maybe, just maybe, it's about finally stepping into the life I've always dreamed of but never believed I deserved. Let me take you back to when I was 19 years old. Back then, life wasn't kind to me. Both of my parents had passed away by the time I was 16, and I bounced around from one foster home to another until I aged out of the system. By 19, I was on my own, working odd jobs, barely scraping together enough money for rent in a dingy studio apartment. That's when I got the job offer that changed everything, nanny for Evan Whitmore, the only child of Charles Whitmore, one of the richest men in New York City. When I walked into their penthouse for the interview, I felt like an alien stepping onto another planet. The place was huge, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of Manhattan that made my knees weak. But it wasn't just the wealth that intimidated me, it was Charles himself. He was tall, stern-looking, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to cut right through you. You could tell he didn't smile often, or maybe ever. His wife had died years earlier in a car accident, leaving him to raise Evan alone. Only, raise might not be the right word. Charles traveled constantly for work, leaving Evan in the care of nannies, housekeepers, or whoever happened to be available at the moment. Evan, oh, Evan. He was 5 years old when I met him, but he carried this quiet sadness about him that broke my heart. He didn't run up to greet me like most kids his age would have. Instead, he sat on the couch, clutching a stuffed bear, watching me with these big, curious eyes. When Charles introduced us, he said, "Emma, this is Evan. Try not to screw this up. Charming guy, right?" Then he left for yet another business trip without so much as a goodbye hug for his son. But here's the thing about Evan, he wasn't hard to love. At first, he kept his distance, testing me like any kid who'd been shuffled between caregivers might. But once he realized I wasn't going anywhere, at least not anytime soon, we started bonding. We played board games, read books together, and even built pillow forts in the living room. For the first time in what must have felt like forever, Evan had someone who truly listened to him. Someone who stayed. Our connection grew stronger every day. To me, Evan wasn't just a job, he became family. Sure, there were challenges. Like the time he decided it'd be fun to pour orange juice into his toy box because he thought it needed vitamins. Or the countless nights he woke up crying after nightmares about his mom. Those moments weren't easy, but they mattered. They showed me how much Evan craved stability and love, and how starved he was for both. And then there was Charles. He called occasionally to check in, usually late at night after some fancy dinner meeting overseas. I tried to keep him updated on Evan's progress, but honestly, it felt like talking to a wall sometimes. He cared about his son, sure, but in this distant, almost clinical way. Once, during one of his rare visits home, I overheard him scolding Evan for getting paint on his shirt during an art project we'd done together. It crushed me to see the light dim in Evan's eyes as he apologized over and over again. That night, after Charles went back to his study, Evan crawled into my lap and whispered, "Do you think Daddy will ever be proud of me?" My throat tightened so hard I couldn't speak. All I could do was hold him tighter and promise him that I was proud of him. As months passed, our little routine became something special. Mornings were spent helping Evan get ready for school, afternoons filled with laughter and learning, and evenings curled up reading bedtime stories. Sometimes, we'd sit by the window and watch the city lights twinkle below. On those nights, Evan would ask questions like, "Emma, do you think Mommy can see us from heaven, or, will I grow up to be rich like Daddy?" Questions no 5-year-old should have to wonder about, but ones I did my best to answer gently. Looking back now, I realize how much Evan shaped me too. Before him, I saw myself as this lost, broken girl trying to survive. But being his caregiver gave me purpose. It taught me patience, resilience, and the power of showing up, even when things got messy. And while I didn't know it at the time, those months working for the Whitmores would ripple through my life in ways I never imagined. That peaceful life I'd built with Evan came crashing down one fateful night, a night I'll never forget as long as I live. It started like any other evening. Charles was out of town again, leaving me in charge of Evan. We'd spent the afternoon baking cookies, well, attempting to bake them, and laughing over how lopsided they turned out. After dinner, I tucked Evan into bed and read him his favorite story about a brave knight who saved a dragon instead of slaying it. When I kissed his forehead goodnight, I had no idea how much courage we'd both need just a few hours later. It was close to midnight when I woke up to the sound of crackling. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe someone burning leaves or trash nearby. But then I smelled it, smoke. Thick, acrid smoke seeping under my door. My heart leapt into my throat as I threw open the door and saw flames licking up the walls of the hallway. The penthouse was on fire. Panic surged through me, but there wasn't time to freeze. I ran straight to Evan's room, shouting his name as I went. The smoke was everywhere now, stinging my eyes and making it hard to breathe. When I reached his bedroom, he was sitting upright in bed, wide-eyed and terrified. "Emma, what's happening?" he cried, clutching his blanket like it could shield him from the chaos outside. I scooped him up without answering, wrapping him in the thickest blanket I could grab to protect him from the heat. "We're going to be okay," I told him firmly, though inside I wasn't so sure. The hallway was fully engulfed by then, flames roaring like a beast trying to devour everything in its path. There was only one way out, the service stairs at the far end of the apartment, but getting there felt impossible. Every step was agony. The heat pressed against us like a wall, and the smoke burned my lungs with every breath. At one point, a beam fell from the ceiling, narrowly missing us but sending sparks flying everywhere. I shielded Evan with my body, ignoring the pain as embers scorched my arms and face. Somehow, we made it to the stairs. By the time we stumbled out onto the street, coughing and gasping for air, firefighters were already arriving. They rushed us to an ambulance, where paramedics treated our burns and wrapped me in bandages that made me look like some kind of mummy. The days after the fire were surreal. The penthouse was destroyed, reduced to charred ruins. Thankfully, Evan hadn't been seriously injured, just shaken up, but I wasn't so lucky. My right hand was badly burned, leaving scars that would never fully fade. My face didn't escape unscathed either, a jagged scar ran along my jawline, a permanent reminder of that night. Still, I didn't care about the physical pain. All that mattered was that Evan was safe. When Charles returned from his trip, you'd think he'd have been grateful, or at least shown some emotion beyond cold indifference. Instead, he barely acknowledged what I'd done. He thanked me with a check, a measly amount compared to what he could have afforded, and then told me quietly but firmly that my services were no longer needed. "It's best for everyone if we part ways," he said, avoiding eye contact. Just like that, I was dismissed. No questions about how I was healing, no concern for what I'd risked to save his son's life. Nothing. At first, I tried to argue. What about Evan? He needs stability. But Charles cut me off before I could finish. "He'll adjust," he said flatly. And that was it. I packed my things, a sad little bag of clothes and books, and walked out of that building for the last time. As I stood on the sidewalk looking back at the towering luxury apartments, I realized something painful. I'd given everything to that family, and they'd thrown me away like yesterday's trash. For weeks afterward, I struggled to find work. Employers took one look at my scarred face and hands and decided I wasn't presentable enough for jobs that required dealing with people. Eventually, I ended up working odd shifts at diners and coffee shops, living paycheck to paycheck. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me alive. What hurt the most, though, wasn't the struggle, it was losing Evan. I missed him more than words can describe. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he understood why I wasn't there anymore. Looking back now, I realize that fire changed more than just my appearance, it changed the course of my life. It taught me how quickly people can turn their backs on you, even when you've given them everything. But it also showed me something else, strength. I survived that night, not just physically but emotionally. And while I may have disappeared from the Whitmore's world, I carried the lessons of that time with me wherever I went. After the fire, life didn't just get harder, it became a relentless uphill battle. The scars on my face and hands weren't just physical reminders of that night, they were also barriers I hadn't anticipated. Employers took one look at me and turned away. "We need someone more presentable," one manager told me after glancing at my bandaged hand during an interview for a retail job. Presentable. Like I was some broken vase instead of a human being who'd risked her life to save a child. It wasn't just work, though. People in general seemed to treat me differently, as if my scars made me less worthy of kindness or respect. Strangers avoided eye contact when I walked down the street, as if looking at me might somehow tarnish their day. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors about how tragic it was that I used to be pretty. As if beauty defined my value. It was infuriating, and lonely. And then there was Todd. My boyfriend at the time, or rather, my ex-boyfriend now. He stuck around for a little while after the fire, but it quickly became clear he wasn't sticking around for me. One evening, we were sitting in his car outside my apartment building, and he finally said what had been brewing in his mind for weeks. "Emma, this isn't easy for me to say, but you're not the same person anymore." Not the same person? What did that even mean? Did he think I wanted to wake up every morning and see these scars staring back at me in the mirror? He went on, stumbling over his words like he couldn't decide whether to sound sympathetic or brutally honest. "You're amazing, you know that. But let's face it, you're not exactly approachable anymore." Approachable. There it was again, that word implying I was somehow defective because of something completely out of my control. He tried to soften the blow by saying things like, "I'll always care about you," but it didn't matter. By the end of the conversation, I was standing alone on the sidewalk watching him drive off into the night, leaving me with nothing but shame and anger. For days, I replayed that moment in my head. How could he do this to me? After everything I'd been through, the fire, losing Evan, struggling to survive, he couldn't even muster the decency to stay by my side. And worst of all, part of me wondered if he was right. Was I unlovable now? Had I lost not just my looks but also whatever fleeting sense of worth I'd managed to hold on to? But life doesn't stop, no matter how much you want it to. So I kept moving forward, even when every step felt like trudging through quicksand. I worked odd jobs, cleaning offices late at night, washing dishes at greasy diners, folding clothes at discount stores where customers barely glanced at me anyway. Some nights, I came home so exhausted I collapsed onto my mattress without bothering to change out of my uniform. Other nights, I sat staring at the cracked plaster ceiling, wondering how I'd ended up here. Just a few years earlier, I'd dreamed of making something of myself. Now, I was lucky if I could scrape together enough money to pay rent and keep the lights on. The bitterness inside me grew with each passing month. I couldn't believe how quickly people forgot about me once I wasn't useful or pretty anymore. Charles Whitmore didn't call to check on me, not once. Neither did anyone else from that world. And Todd? He started dating someone new within weeks. I saw them together once at a cafe downtown. She was gorgeous, of course, flawless skin, perfect hair, laughing at something he said. They looked happy. Seeing them made me feel invisible, like I'd faded into the background of my own life. Still, despite everything, I refused to give up. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was just sheer willpower, I don't know. But somewhere deep down, I believed I deserved better than this. I deserved to exist beyond the scars, beyond the rejection, beyond the way others chose to define me. So I worked harder, saved what little I could, and held on to the hope that someday, somehow, things would turn around. Looking back now, I realize those years taught me something painful but important. People can be cruel, especially when you're vulnerable. But they also taught me resilience. Every scar, every betrayal, every moment of loneliness shaped me into someone stronger. Someone who wouldn't let the world break her, even when it tried. I refused to let life bury me, even when it felt like the world was conspiring against me. I knew I couldn't keep living paycheck to paycheck, stuck in dead-end jobs that barely kept a roof over my head. If I wanted to change my circumstances, I had to take control, and that meant doing something drastic. So one evening, after another grueling shift at a diner where customers treated me like invisible help, I made a decision. I was going back to school. It wasn't easy, far from it. During the day, I worked whatever odd jobs I could find, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, babysitting for families who didn't ask too many questions about my scars. At night, I studied nursing. It was exhausting, juggling work and classes while trying to scrape together enough money for tuition and rent. There were nights when I fell asleep at my kitchen table with textbooks open in front of me, too tired to drag myself to bed. Mornings came too soon, pulling me out of restless sleep and back into the grind. But through all the exhaustion and struggle, there was this tiny flicker of hope inside me, a light I hadn't felt in years. Nursing wasn't just a career choice, it was a way to give back, to do something meaningful with my life. Maybe I couldn't save everyone or fix everything wrong with the world, but I could make a difference, one patient at a time. That thought carried me through the hardest days. Of course, not every moment was filled with inspiration. There were plenty of times when the weight of everything threatened to crush me. Late at night, lying awake in my cramped apartment, I'd think about Evan. I wondered how he was doing, whether he still remembered me or if Charles had erased me completely from his life. Did he ever look out the window and wonder where I'd gone? Did he miss our pillow forts and bedtime stories? Those memories were bittersweet, like holding on to something precious that you know you'll never get back. But they also reminded me of why I kept fighting. For a while, I'd been someone's hero. And maybe, just maybe, I could be that again, not just for others, but for myself. The road ahead was long, and progress felt painfully slow. My first semester of nursing school was brutal. I struggled to balance work, study, and survival. Some days, I doubted whether I'd made the right choice. Was I strong enough to see this through? Would anyone even hire me once they saw my scars? But then I'd remember the fire, the way I'd pushed past fear to save Evan, and I'd tell myself, if you survive that, you can survive anything. Slowly, things began to improve. By my second year of school, I landed a part-time job as a caregiver for elderly patients. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me real-world experience and reminded me why I'd chosen this path in the first place. The people I cared for weren't concerned about my appearance, they needed kindness, patience, and compassion. And in return, they gave me something priceless, gratitude. One woman, Mrs. Adler, always called me her guardian angel because I stayed late to read her favorite novels aloud when no one else had the time. Another man, Mr. Peterson, joked that my stubbornness rivaled his own, which we both knew was high praise coming from him. These small connections reminded me that I still had value, scars and all. As the months passed, I started to see glimpses of the person I used to dream of becoming. I wasn't fixed, I don't think anyone ever truly is, but I was healing. I learned to carry my pain without letting it define me. The bitterness I'd felt toward Todd, Charles, and everyone else who'd turned their backs on me softened into something quieter, less consuming. They hadn't defined my worth, and neither did my scars. I was more than what had happened to me. Even so, Evan never faded from my mind. He was this constant presence in my heart, a reminder of the love and connection I'd once had, and maybe someday could have again. I hoped he was happy, wherever he was. I hoped he knew how much I'd loved him, even if I hadn't been able to stay in his life. Those memories weren't just painful reminders of loss, they were proof that I was capable of love, of sacrifice, of being someone's safe haven. And that gave me strength to keep moving forward. Looking back now, I realize those years were some of the hardest, but also some of the most transformative, of my life. Every setback taught me resilience. Every victory, no matter how small, reminded me that I was still standing. I didn't know it at the time, but I was building the foundation for something greater than I could have imagined. Something that would carry me through whatever came next. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and polished wood, the kind of place where secrets festered in the shadows. As I sat there, staring at the documents spread across his desk, Mr. Thompson began to fill me in on what had happened to the Whitmore family after I disappeared from their lives. It wasn't pretty. Charles Whitmore hadn't stayed single for long after that fire. Within a year, he'd remarried, a woman named Vanessa Grayson, who sounded like she stepped straight out of a tabloid headline. Beautiful, cunning, and utterly ruthless, Vanessa wasn't just after Charles's money, she wanted control over everything, their estate, their social circle, even Evan. From what Mr. Thompson told me, she made it clear early on that Evan was nothing more than an obstacle between her and the Whitmore fortune. Evan, poor Evan. The sweet little boy I'd loved so fiercely grew up in a house that only became colder with time. Vanessa didn't care about him, not really. To her, he was a pawn in her game, someone to manipulate or ignore as it suited her needs. And Charles? Well, Charles might as well have been invisible. He buried himself deeper in his work, leaving Evan to fend for himself under Vanessa's watchful, calculating gaze. By the time Evan turned 18, he couldn't take it anymore. He left home, cutting ties with both his father and stepmother. No goodbyes, no explanations, just gone. What surprised me most, though, was what Evan did next. Instead of leaning on his family's wealth or name, he struck out on his own. He built a business from scratch, working tirelessly to create something entirely his own. According to Mr. Thompson, Evan had become a successful entrepreneur by the age of 25, running a tech company that earned him millions. But success didn't come without scars, emotional ones this time. Evan kept people at arm's length, trusting almost no one. Rumor had it he never dated seriously and avoided anything resembling family gatherings like the plague. It broke my heart to hear how much he'd closed himself off, but part of me understood why. After everything he'd been through, how could he not? Meanwhile, the Whitmore name fell into disarray. Scandals erupted one after another, each more explosive than the last. Vanessa's greed knew no bounds, and her schemes eventually caught up with her. She drained Charles's accounts, left him drowning in debt, and then filed for divorce, walking away with a hefty settlement. By the time Benjamin Aldridge passed away, Charles was practically penniless, living in a modest apartment far removed from the luxurious penthouse I once worked in. His health declined rapidly, and he died alone, estranged from his son. As Mr. Thompson explained all of this, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, pity. The family I'd once known, flawed as they were, had unraveled completely. Vanessa destroyed them piece by piece until there was almost nothing left. And yet, despite everything, Evan managed to rise above it. He carved out his own path, refusing to let his toxic upbringing define him. In a way, I felt proud of him, even if we'd lost touch years ago. Still, hearing about their downfall left me unsettled. It wasn't schadenfreude, I didn't relish anyone's pain, not even Vanessa's. But it made me wonder, would things have been different if I'd stayed? Could I have protected Evan from some of the darkness that consumed his family? Or would I have ended up swallowed by it too? These questions swirled in my mind as I listened to Mr. Thompson recount the sordid details of the Whitmores' collapse. By the end of our meeting, one thing was clear, the inheritance Benjamin Aldridge left behind wasn't just about money, it was a lifeline. For me, yes, but maybe also for Evan. Because somewhere along the way, Benjamin must have seen what I saw back then, a boy worth saving. A boy worth fighting for. About 5 years ago, something happened that I never saw coming. By then, I'd been working as a nurse for a few years, finally finding my footing in a career that gave me purpose. It was a typical day at the hospital, chaotic, exhausting, and emotionally draining. Patients came and went, each with their own stories of pain and resilience. But one patient stood out, though I didn't realize it at first. He was brought in late in the afternoon, pale and unconscious, after a car accident on the highway. The doctors worked quickly to stabilize him, and by the time they wheeled him into recovery, I was assigned to monitor his condition. When he finally opened his eyes, groggy but alert, I introduced myself like I always did. "Hi, I'm Emma. I'll be taking care of you tonight." For a moment, he just stared at me, blinking slowly as if trying to place a face from a distant memory. Then, softly, almost hesitantly, he said, "Emma Carson." My breath caught in my throat. I recognized him instantly, even though the little boy I once knew had grown into a young man. His voice was deeper now, his features sharper, but those eyes, those same big, curious eyes, were unmistakable. "Evan?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He nodded weakly, a faint smile breaking across his face. In that moment, it felt like the entire world stopped spinning. All the years we'd spent apart melted away, leaving only the bond we'd shared all those years ago. We talked for hours that night, long after his vitals were stable and the other nurses urged me to take a break. Evan told me about his life since I'd left, the loneliness, the battles with Vanessa, the decision to leave home and start over. He spoke about building his company from the ground up, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. And then, quietly, he said something that brought tears to my eyes. "If it weren't for you, Emma, I don't think I'd be alive today. You saved me, not just from the fire, but from everything else too." I didn't know what to say. How do you respond to something like that? Instead, I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're stronger than you realize, Evan," I told him. "You've always been strong." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "No, it's because of you. You taught me how to fight back when things got hard. You showed me what it meant to have someone who truly cared." That night, we reconnected in ways I hadn't thought possible. We talked about the fire, about Charles, about Vanessa's manipulation and the scars it left behind, not just on Evan, but on both of us. He apologized for not reaching out sooner, explaining that he tried to find me after leaving home but couldn't. "I asked Dad where you went, but he wouldn't tell me anything," Evan admitted. And then, I guess I lost hope. Listening to him, I realized how much we'd both carried the weight of our past separately. Yet here we were, reunited by fate, or maybe just by sheer coincidence, in the most unexpected place. Despite everything, Evan still carried the kindness and warmth I remembered from when he was a child. Only now, it was tempered by maturity, by the lessons life had forced upon him. By morning, Evan was discharged, and our brief reunion came to an end. Before he left, he promised to stay in touch this time, and he kept his word. Over the next few months, we exchanged emails and occasional phone calls. It wasn't the same as being part of each other's lives every day, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that some connections can survive even the longest separations. Looking back now, that night in the hospital feels like a turning point, not just for Evan and me, but for everything that followed. It reminded me that no matter how far apart people drift, the bonds we form in moments of vulnerability can endure. And sometimes, those bonds come full circle when we least expect them. The lawyer's voice grew quieter, heavier, as he leaned forward in his chair. "There's something else you need to know," Mr. Thompson said, his tone grave. My stomach tightened. I'd already heard so much about the Whitmore family's unraveling, but the look on his face told me this wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Apparently, Evan's success hadn't gone unnoticed, or unchallenged. Vanessa, Charles's ex-wife, had been watching from the shadows all along, plotting her next move. She'd remarried after divorcing Charles, aligning herself with powerful, dangerous people who shared her greed. And when Evan started making waves in the business world, amassing wealth and influence, Vanessa saw an opportunity she couldn't resist. According to Mr. Thompson, she began scheming to take control of Evan's assets that technically would have passed to her if anything happened to him. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But here's the thing, Vanessa wasn't one to let morality get in the way of what she wanted. She orchestrated a plan to cut Evan out of the picture permanently. The car accident that brought him into my hospital bed 5 years ago? It wasn't just an accident. There were signs, even back then, that someone had tampered with his vehicle. Brake lines cut. Tires slashed. Evidence that pointed to foul play. But without proof, the investigation stalled, and everyone assumed it was just bad luck. What no one realized, at least, not until now, was that Evan suspected something too. He didn't say anything outright during our brief reunion at the hospital, but looking back, I can see how guarded he was. How carefully he chose his words. Even in those emails and calls we exchanged afterward, there was always this undercurrent of caution, like he was afraid of being overheard. At the time, I chalked it up to his natural reserve, the walls he'd built around himself after everything he'd endured. But now, hearing Mr. Thompson piece it all together, I realize Evan knew his life was in danger. And then, just days before the accident that claimed his life, Evan did something remarkable. Something brave. He changed his will. Completely rewrote it, leaving everything, the businesses, the properties, the money, to the person he trusted most, me. Emma Carson. A former nanny who'd walked out of his life decades ago. When Mr. Thompson showed me the document, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold it steady. Why? I whispered, more to myself than to him. Why would Evan leave all of this to me? After everything he'd accomplished, after building a life so far removed from the chaos of his childhood, why choose me? The lawyer sighed, adjusting his glasses. Evan left a letter with the will, he explained. He instructed me to give it to you once you'd agreed to accept the inheritance. He slid a folded piece of paper across the desk toward me. My heart pounded as I opened it, Evan's familiar handwriting staring back at me. Dear Emma, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I don't have much time to explain, but I need you to know this: you saved me, not just from the fire, but from myself. You taught me how to trust again, how to believe in kindness even when the world felt cruel. That night in the hospital, seeing you again reminded me of who I used to be, and who I still wanted to be. You deserve this more than anyone I know. Use it wisely, and don't let them win. Tears blurred my vision as I read those words over and over again. Don't let them win. Who exactly they were, Evan didn't specify. Maybe Vanessa. Maybe others involved in whatever twisted game they were playing. But whatever the case, Evan had made his choice. He'd entrusted me with everything he'd worked so hard to build, a final act of defiance against the people who'd tried to destroy him. As I sat there in stunned silence, Mr. Thompson added quietly, Evan knew the risks he was taking. Changing his will like that, it was practically a death sentence. But he did it anyway. For you. I couldn't speak. Couldn't process the weight of what I'd just learned. Evan had sacrificed everything, for me. Again. First as a child, clinging to the hope that I'd stay. Now as a man, ensuring that his legacy wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. And suddenly, I understood, this wasn't just about money or property. This was about justice. About reclaiming power from the people who'd spent years trying to tear him down. For a moment, I felt overwhelmed by grief, not just for Evan, but for the life he might have lived if things had been different. If he hadn't been born into a family consumed by greed and betrayal. But beneath the sadness, there was something else too: determination. Evan had fought for me, believed in me, and now it was my turn to honor his memory. To make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. The moment I accepted Evan's inheritance, my life became a battlefield. It started with a knock on my door, a process server handing me papers that accused me of fraud. The Whitmore family, or what was left of it, had filed a lawsuit against me. They claimed I'd manipulated Evan into changing his will, that I'd preyed on his vulnerability for financial gain. Vanessa, Charles's ex-wife and the mastermind behind their toxic empire, spearheaded the attack. She painted me as a gold digger, a conniving woman who'd wormed her way into Evan's life just to steal his fortune. And then came the media circus. Reporters camped outside my apartment building, shoving microphones in my face every time I stepped outside. Headlines screamed accusations: former nanny stands to gain millions from tragic heir's death, did Emma Carson exploit Evan Whitmore? Overnight, I went from being an ordinary nurse to the villain everyone loved to hate. The public ate it up, every salacious detail, every twisted theory about how I'd orchestrated Evan's downfall. To them, I wasn't a survivor, I was a parasite. A vulture feasting on the remains of a tragic young man's legacy. Even worse was the court case itself. Sitting in that courtroom day after day felt like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The prosecution tore apart every aspect of my life, the scars on my face, my humble background, even my brief relationship with Todd. They twisted everything to fit their narrative, portraying me as desperate and calculating. One lawyer sneered at me during cross-examination, asking if I thought Evan owed me something for saving his life all those years ago. Another suggested I'd used our chance meeting at the hospital to manipulate him into rewriting his will. It was relentless. Every question, every accusation, chipped away at whatever dignity I had left. And through it all, Vanessa sat there in the front row, perfectly composed, watching the spectacle unfold with this smug little smile playing on her lips. She didn't say much, she didn't have to. Her lawyers did the dirty work for her, spinning lies so convincing that even some of Evan's old friends began to doubt me. But the worst part? Knowing the truth, and knowing no one would believe me. Evan had trusted me. He'd chosen me because he knew I'd protect his legacy, because he believed in the person I'd become. Yet here I was, standing trial for crimes I hadn't committed, facing the possibility of losing everything, or worse, ending up in prison. My own defense team fought valiantly, but the odds were stacked against us. Without concrete evidence proving Evan's suspicions about foul play in his death, we were stuck defending my character instead of exposing the real culprits. Witnesses were called. One neighbor testified that I always seemed secretive, while another claimed I'd once mentioned wanting to get back at the Whitmores. Lies, all of them. But in the eyes of the jury, they added up to a damning portrait of greed and betrayal. As the days dragged on, I found myself questioning whether I could endure this. How do you fight when the entire world has turned against you? When every step forward feels like 2 steps back. Some nights, I cried until I couldn't breathe, wondering if accepting Evan's gift had been a mistake. Maybe I should have walked away, let the Whitmores take what they wanted, and disappeared quietly into obscurity. At least then, I wouldn't be fighting this losing battle. But then I'd remember Evan's letter, the words he'd written to me before he died. Don't let them win. Those 4 simple words echoed in my mind whenever the pressure threatened to crush me. Evan had entrusted me with his legacy not because he pitied me, but because he believed in me. Believed I was strong enough to stand up to the people who'd tried to destroy him. And if I gave up now, I'd be letting them win, not just over me, but over him too. So I kept fighting. Even when the judge ruled against admitting key pieces of evidence. Even when the jury looked at me like I was guilty before the verdict was read. Even when reporters hounded me outside the courthouse, shouting questions designed to humiliate me further. I held on to the hope that somewhere, somehow, the truth would come out. That Evan's faith in me wouldn't be in vain. Just when I thought I couldn't take another blow, something shifted. It started with a knock on my lawyer's office door. A man walked in, unassuming but determined. His name was Ryan Adler, one of Evan's closest friends from college. He'd seen the news about the trial and decided to come forward with information he'd been holding onto for years. Ryan explained that Evan had confided in him shortly before his death. They'd exchanged encrypted messages and voice notes, Evan's way of documenting everything without raising suspicion. In those recordings, Evan revealed his growing fear that Vanessa and her allies were planning to eliminate him once and for all. But instead of backing down, Evan made a bold move. He rewrote his will, leaving everything to me, knowing it would throw them off balance. Emma is the only person I trust, Evan said in one of the voice notes. If anything happens to me, make sure she gets what's hers. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. Hearing Evan's voice again after so long broke something open inside me. It wasn't just the confirmation of his suspicions, it was the raw emotion in his words, the vulnerability beneath his strength. He hadn't acted out of desperation, he'd acted out of love. Love for me, for the bond we shared, for the family we'd created even if only for a short time. But Ryan wasn't done yet. He handed over a USB drive containing one final piece of evidence, a video message Evan had recorded specifically for me. My lawyer played it during the trial, and as the screen flickered to life, there he was, young, handsome, alive. Smiling faintly at the camera as if he could see me sitting there watching him. "Hey, Emma," he began, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "If you're seeing this, it probably means I'm gone. And while I wish things could have turned out differently, I need you to know how much you mean to me. You saved my life, not just from the fire, but from everything else too. When I was a kid, you gave me something no one else ever did, a real family. Someone who cared about me not because they had to, but because they wanted to." He paused, looking away for a moment before meeting the camera again. "I don't know what's going to happen next. But I do know this, I trust you more than anyone in this world. That's why I changed my will. Not because I feel sorry for you or because I owe you anything, but because you deserve every bit of it. Use it to build the life you've always dreamed of. Don't let them win, Emma. Promise me that." By the time the video ended, tears were streaming down my face. The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed on the screen where Evan's image still lingered. For the first time since the trial began, I felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't just evidence, it was proof of who Evan truly was. A man who refused to let greed and hatred define him. A man who chose gratitude over bitterness, love over revenge. Vanessa's composure cracked almost immediately. Her lawyers scrambled to discredit the footage, claiming it was fabricated or manipulated. But it didn't matter. The jury saw Evan for who he was, a victim of betrayal, yes, but also a fighter. Someone who'd fought to protect the people he loved until his very last breath. As the trial progressed, the tide finally began to turn. With Ryan's testimony and Evan's video message as cornerstones of our defense, the prosecution's case crumbled. The media narrative shifted too. Stories about the gold-digging nanny gave way to headlines like Evan Whitmore's final stand against family betrayal. Public opinion swung in my favor, though honestly, I didn't care about that anymore. What mattered was clearing Evan's name, and mine. When the verdict came in, it was unanimous. I was acquitted of all charges. Vanessa and her co-conspirators weren't so lucky, they faced criminal investigations into their roles in Evan's death. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Enough to honor Evan's memory. Enough to remind me that even in the darkest moments, truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. The courtroom was silent as the video ended, Evan's final words hanging in the air like a promise that couldn't be broken. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Even the judge seemed frozen, his gavel resting untouched on the bench. Then, slowly, the murmurs began. A juror wiped away tears, another leaned forward, visibly shaken. It wasn't just the weight of Evan's message, it was the raw truth behind it. The kind of truth that cuts through lies and exposes people for who they really are. My lawyer stood up then, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, addressing both them and the packed courtroom, "this isn't just about money or property. This is about trust. About love. About a young man who refused to let greed and betrayal define his legacy. Emma Carson didn't manipulate Evan Whitmore. She saved him, not once, but twice. First from the fire, and then by being the only person he could truly count on." He turned to face Vanessa, her polished facade finally cracking under the pressure. Gone was the poised woman who'd smirked at me from across the room. Now she sat rigid, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. My lawyer seized the moment. "And let's not forget the real culprits here," he continued, gesturing toward Vanessa and her accomplices. These individuals didn't just scheme to steal Evan's fortune, they tried to erase him entirely. To silence him before he could expose their crimes. With that, he introduced more evidence, emails between Vanessa and her associates discussing ways to neutralize Evan, financial records showing illegal transfers meant to bankrupt him, even surveillance footage of someone tampering with his car before the accident. Each revelation hit like a thunderclap, exposing layer after layer of corruption. The Whitmores weren't just greedy, they were dangerous. And now, there was nowhere left for them to hide. Vanessa's lawyer tried to counter, but his argument sounded hollow compared to the mountain of proof against her. Every excuse, every attempt to shift blame, only made her look guiltier. By the time closing statements rolled around, the mood in the courtroom had shifted completely. What started as a trial accusing me of fraud had become a reckoning for the Whitmore family, a public unmasking of their darkest secrets. When the jury returned with their verdict, my heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, as the foreman stood up and read the decision aloud. We find the defendant, Emma Carson, not guilty on all counts. Relief washed over me so powerfully I nearly collapsed. Around me, reporters scrambled to capture the moment, snapping photos and shouting questions I couldn't hear over the rush of blood in my ears. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the knowledge that Evan's faith in me hadn't been misplaced. That I'd fought for him, and won. As the judge dismissed the case, chaos erupted in the courtroom. Vanessa stormed out, flanked by her lawyers, her face twisted in rage. Reporters swarmed me, but I barely noticed. Instead, I turned to Ryan, who'd stayed through the entire trial to support me. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling. If it hadn't been for him stepping forward with Evan's messages and recordings, I don't know where I'd be right now. But the victory wasn't just mine, it belonged to Evan too. He'd taken a stand against the people who tried to destroy him, leaving behind a legacy rooted in courage and integrity. And now, officially declared the rightful heir to his estate, I vowed to honor that legacy in every way possible. Not just for Evan, but for anyone who'd ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, the sun warm on my face, I realized something profound: this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A chance to rebuild, not just my life, but everything Evan had believed in. To prove that even in a world full of darkness, light can still prevail. The victory should have felt sweeter, shouldn't it? I mean, I'd been declared innocent, the Whitmore family exposed for the monsters they truly were. Legally, financially, I had everything I could have hoped for. But as I sat alone in my apartment that night, staring at the stack of legal documents declaring me the rightful heir to Evan's fortune, all I felt was an aching emptiness. Money couldn't bring him back. No matter how much wealth or power came with this inheritance, none of it could fill the void left by losing Evan. He wasn't just a boy I'd once cared for, he was family. The little brother I never had but always wanted. And now, he was gone forever, taken too soon by people who didn't deserve to share his name. I thought about the video message he'd recorded, the way he'd smiled into the camera like he knew exactly what he was doing. "Use it to build the life you've always dreamed of," he'd said. But what did that even mean anymore? My dreams weren't about luxury cars or penthouse apartments. They weren't about revenge or proving myself to anyone. What I wanted most, a chance to see Evan grow up, to watch him laugh and live without fear, was something no amount of money could ever give me. That's when the idea came to me. Not fully formed at first, just a flicker of inspiration. What if I used this inheritance not for myself, but for others? For kids like Evan, kids who'd lost their families, who felt invisible, who needed someone to believe in them. I couldn't save every child out there, but maybe I could make a difference for a few. Maybe I could honor Evan's memory in a way that mattered. By morning, the plan was clear. I would use the majority of the funds to open a center for orphaned and vulnerable children, a place where they could feel safe, loved, and supported. A place where no one would ever have to endure what Evan and I had gone through. I named it after him, the Evan Whitmore Center for Hope. It seemed fitting, not because of his last name, but because of the hope he'd given me when I needed it most. It wasn't easy to get started. Setting up the foundation required navigating paperwork, hiring staff, finding a location, but none of it felt like work. Every step forward was a reminder of why I was doing this. Of the promise I'd made to Evan, even if he hadn't asked for it outright. There were moments when doubt crept in, of course. Who was I to take on such a massive responsibility? I wasn't rich before this, I wasn't some philanthropic genius. But then I remembered something Evan had told me during our reunion at the hospital: "You taught me how to fight back when things got hard." And now, it was my turn to keep fighting, for him, for the kids who deserved better, for the future we both believed in. When the center finally opened its doors 6 months later, I stood in the lobby watching the first group of children arrive. Some clung to their social workers' hands, wide-eyed and nervous. Others ran straight to the playroom, laughing as if they'd already found a new home. Tears filled my eyes as I looked around at the space we'd created, a bright, welcoming environment filled with books, toys, and counselors ready to listen. This was Evan's legacy. Not the money, not the scandals, but the love and resilience he inspired in everyone lucky enough to know him. As I walked through the halls that day, I whispered under my breath, "Thank you, Evan. For trusting me. For believing in me. I won't let you down." And for the first time since his death, I felt peace, not because the pain was gone, but because I knew I was carrying his light forward. One child at a time. I still remember the day I stood in front of the Evan Whitmore Foundation, watching the kids play under the late afternoon sun. Their laughter filled the air, bright, unguarded, and so full of life. Some chased each other across the grass, while others sat quietly on the benches, sketching pictures or reading books we'd stocked in the library. Each child carried their own story, their own scars, but here, they were safe. Here, they belonged. I leaned against the railing, arms crossed, as a soft breeze brushed past me. My heart felt heavy with memories of Evan but also lightened by the joy around me. These kids, they reminded me of him. Of the little boy who used to sit by the window, staring at the city lights, wondering if his mom could see him from heaven. And now, this place was my way of telling him, "You're seen. You're loved. You always were." As I stood there, a voice inside me whispered something I'd known for years but never fully articulated, not until now. Not everyone is born into a family, I thought, but sometimes, love comes when you least expect it. And that love can change everything. Evan wasn't my blood relative, but he became my family in ways that transcended DNA. He taught me what it meant to care for someone selflessly, to fight for them even when the odds felt insurmountable. And now, through this foundation, I hope to pass that lesson along, to show these kids that family isn't just about where you come from. It's about who stands beside you when it matters most. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting golden shadows over the playground. I took one last look at the children before heading back inside, already thinking about tomorrow's plans. New programs to launch, more resources to gather, bigger dreams to chase. None of it would bring Evan back, but all of it kept him alive. In every smile, every hug, every moment of connection between staff and kids, I saw pieces of him. Pieces of hope. And so, as the day ended and the world grew quiet, I let myself believe in something greater than loss. Greater than grief. Love doesn't have to be tied by blood. Sometimes, it finds you in the smallest moments, a shared laugh, a comforting hand, a promise kept. And sometimes, that love saves you. Not everyone is born with a family. But sometimes, loving at the right time can save an entire life. This story reminds us of something powerful. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by love. Emma and Evan's bond proves that even in the darkest moments, human connection has the power to heal, protect, and transform lives. Their journey teaches us that while we can't control the hardships life throws at us, we can choose how we respond. We can choose kindness over bitterness, courage over fear, and hope over despair. Emma's decision to turn her pain into purpose by creating the Evan Whitmore Foundation shows us that legacy isn't about wealth or fame, it's about impact. It's about leaving the world better than you found it. And Evan? His courage to trust, to fight back against those who sought to harm him, reminds us that even when we feel powerless, there's strength in standing up for what's right. So, what can we take away from this? Love fiercely. Fight for the people who matter most. And never underestimate the ripple effect of your actions. Whether it's saving a child from a fire or opening a center to care for kids who have no one, every act of love leaves a mark. Every choice matters. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What stood out to you most about Emma and Evan's story? Was it their unbreakable bond? The way Emma turned tragedy into triumph? Or maybe it was Evan's quiet bravery in the face of betrayal? Share your reflections in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm always inspired by your insights. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling tales like this one. Each week, we bring you narratives that explore the depths of human resilience, relationships, and redemption. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Together, let's keep celebrating stories that remind us of the beauty and complexity of life.